Welcome to another Sunday Superversive Livestream. I am your host, Benjamin Wheeler, and today we are discussing satire, common targets of satire, the many different ways that people use it and abuse it, and also, most importantly, when it goes too far. I'm joined today by my co-host, as always, Anthony Marquetta. Anthony, how are you doing?
The horrors persist, but so do I.
That's my meme. But yeah, no, you're right. It's absolutely true. The horrors persist, and so do we, by the grace of God. So recently,
Mm.
there's been a lot of talk. I know you're not really on Twitter, Anthony, but there's been a lot of talk about satire. Quite frankly, people don't get it. But there's a few sort of posts that I want to point to. A big one is Jeff Rose Johnson's eternal fight against people who will not play D&D right. The people who think that Warhammer 40K uh, should be, I don't know, letting in female space marines or something, and all sorts of nonsense like that. You also have a post on 4chan that is quite fascinating, as sometimes 4chan posts are, about Stephen Fry's career, where basically where the guy goes, this guy started making fun of stiff conservative types when he did. I can't remember if he was part of Monty Python's Flying Circus. Hello, our watchers: Bradford Walker, Caitlin Nye, and Simon Hogwood. Uh, basically,
Whoa. Three people.
three people, three people. Uh, basically, he goes, you used to make they used to make he used to make fun of these conservatives, these stiff upper lipped, starch collar conservatives who were always so serious and always ready to be scandalized. And he had a monoculture that he could make fun of, and he had this and he had that, and now, well, what does he have? He doesn't have that. He doesn't have a British monoculture. These lovely, wonderful, stiff necked conservatives aren't there anymore to be scandalized or made fun of and all this other stuff. As a, comedian, what does he have? And then we get to the topic that caused me to gain a little traction on Twitter. Less than you think. It's an aberration. But I've got about 40K views on this so far, which counts for us as viral. Uh, One of the biggest author traps is intention versus real. The intention of the Judge Dredd writers and artists was to have Dredd as some authoritarian boot, pick your fancy, fascist, hypercapitalist, uh, totalitarian in general. It doesn't actually matter about the authoritarian bit. Stomping down forever. But the problem is they made their world too criminal. The people are insane. They need Dredd stomping down, and he has the heroic will to do so. His This is a response to DGD Davison, who wrote a Magical Girl series way back when, in the Superversive times. He said, I've been thinking something along the lines as I've been reading Judge Dredd in chronological order. His creators character assassinated him in the mid 80s because it terrified them that the people saw Dredd as a hero. But he was a hero, and it's crazy they couldn't see that. Now, I don't know too much about it. I do have some Dredd collections from my childhood, but quite frankly, I've never seen any character assassinations of on Dredd. But it's pretty clear that the writers, the creators of Judge Dredd, had a certain image in mind of what he is and what he represents. Anything from fascist police states to authoritarianism to really choose your fancy, whatever the liberal feared at the time. Maybe Margaret Thatcher. Maybe Judge Dredd is a giant metaphor for Margaret Thatcher's iron heel stepping on them forever. Because goodness gracious me, uh, back in the days of Margaret Thatcher, you couldn't swing a coal miner's pickaxe at a police officer without finding somebody trying to parody Margaret Thatcher. Think of how they treat Donald Trump today. You kind of have an opinion. You kind of have an idea of how bad it was. So, but the thing is, nobody knows that except for like me and some other weirdos, and maybe the people who lived through it. Maybe. Uh, so we look at Judge Dredd and we see him as the sole voice of law and order in a insane criminal world. Everyone is going for crimes all the time. Every day there's a million crimes, 100,000 murders in Mega City 1 and other ridiculous numbers like that. These are people who are fit to be stomped on forever. They get the government they deserve, and it turns out because they are criminals down to their DNA, that they deserve being stomped on forever. I just keep coming back on that. It's like keeping down a mole or something who's destroying your garden. Some examples. Now, these are from the start of Judge Dredd's comic career when they were doing single pages and stuff or 2 pages, that sort of thing. There was a trend where people deliberately uglified themselves and would seek this out even after the judges banned it. There was, and again, this is just all from the first years of Judge Dredd. There was a guy who designed theme parks for skaters to ramp off into a pool of water doing flips and stuff. He's off by 15 degrees, and he just kind of goes whoopsie while standing over the splattered, skater, who is, of course, being investigated by Judge Dredd. In another one, now, to be fair to them, this was an accident, but they had these roving RVs. This roving RV runs into and kills, several hundred people in line to buy apartments in a mega city block. Their reaction was, oops, but at least I'm in the front of the line now. And these are the normal people. These are, these aren't like the rich, important leaders of Mega City 1. These are people who are middle to lower class. And it keeps going on and on and on, and I'm just thinking of more and more people who basically deserved Judge Dredd throwing them in the ISO cubes. There isn't any, you can look at it and you can see, Judge Dredd arresting somebody for a late library book is pretty insane. But at the same time, the next page over had the couple who took their RV, accidentally ran over a bunch of people and just kind of went, oh, okay, at least I'm in the front of the line. There's a spirit to the people of Mega City 1, which is quite frankly akin to rats in a cage who are constantly being abused. It is absolutely terrifying to live in that world. And the other ones that sort of get brought up are things like Dirty Harry and Warhammer 40K. Well, Warhammer 40K, sounds pretty fascist and all this other things until you realize that they're dealing with literal satans who are speed biking with chainsaw swords to destroy you, your family, and your entire world. And, just in case anyone doubts it, one of the first acts of one of their gods is to devour the whole souls of an entire species. Did I just get myself stuck? No, okay. So it gets, and what are the other ones? You mean, do you think that the Tyranids are better? The all-devouring swarm? Or the Tau with their mind-wiping powers that were recently introduced? Or, what's another one? The Orcs who want to fight everyone all the time? Or the Dark Elves? Yeah, it just keeps getting worse and it never gets better. None of the species in 40K are good, and that's the whole point of it. You know, going crazy over women space marines or something isn't going to do anything for anybody. Anthony, what's your opinion about what I've just ranted and raved about?
I mean, I'm actually not huge into Judge Dredd. The most I have is that I'm pretty sure I saw the movie with
Carl Urban.
yeah. Yeah,
That's a
thank you,
good movie.
Carl Urban. I'm
Yeah,
pretty sure I saw that movie at some point.
that's a good movie.
And it was pretty good.
Oh
But that's like my entire connection to Judge Dredd.
yeah.
So I can't really confirm or deny if like they really if everything people are saying about the character, the world, or whatever is true.
So
But
hold on. Here's
yeah,
another one. A very famous example from Judge Dredd. Occasionally there are what's called block wars, where an entire population of a city block, and these are like everything's a skyscraper, so these are tens of thousands of people, fights another city block, which is, you know, again, tens and thousands of people, and they basically shoot at each other from their windows. The opening of the Sylvester Stallone movie uh, has him dealing with a block war. Judge Dredd dealing with a block war between two blocks. So it's you know, like these are common people in their own homes setting up machine gun nests to shoot at the skyscraper next door.
yeah, the so this is the thing that you see in a lot of these sorts of work is how I would put it.
Yeah,
Like you see it in Watchmen as well, of course. That's the famous example that was originally brought up, actually.
yeah.
Uh,
But
Basically,
there's been a bigger conversation. The Watchmen one is just the one before
yeah.
DGG
But
Davidson's.
basically,
Yeah.
you bring up you create a world of moral. I'm trying to think of the right word.
Depravity, total
Thank
depravity.
you. That's
Become
what I was looking.
Calvinist.
That's actually the word I was looking for. Yeah,
Yeah,
a word of like total moral depravity, right? Where
right.
everybody is evil, and then into that world, or like everybody's corrupt,
Yeah,
right? Or evil, or just straight up evil, or both.
yeah,
And you introduce into that world somebody who in the normal real world would be a psycho, but in a world of moral depravity is the only one with any principles.
yep,
So naturally, everybody latches onto them because, of course, they do.
right.
Everybody else is literally evil. Rorschach is the example of this. Like, that doesn't necessarily mean he's the literal first example,
He's
but
just
he's
the
the most
best.
famous because, yeah, because Alan Moore famously hates Rorschach. And he famously has gone on the record about how he thinks that Rorschach is a psycho. And here's the thing, if it were our world, he would be right. Rorschach would be a psycho, but it's not our world. It's the world of Watchmen where everybody is corrupt or a liar. And Rorschach is there saying, no, my principles might be messed up or like they might not be entirely correct, but I have them, right? Like
Right,
maybe I'm standing on the wrong things, but I have principles.
right,
And you're like, yeah, this is a man with conviction. I can rally behind this guy.
right.
Judge Dredd is the same way, right?
Yeah,
It's the world of total depravity. And would Judge Dredd work in our world?
no.
Uh, no, obviously not. He would be a psycho. He'd go to jail, and probably conservatives would turn against him, right?
Mm,
But he doesn't exist in our world.
yep,
Like, and by conservative, I mean like even the right wing,
yeah,
like would turn against someone like that because they would be like, oh, it's the police are on a power trip,
right.
and sure that would be true here. The problem is it's not the police on a power trip. It's the fact that the police actually need to do this to keep order.
Yep,
It's not corruption. If they don't do it, there isn't order.
yes,
Like, so it just completely fails as a commentary. It's like the police are going too far. Really? Because when the police don't go that far,
right,
then things spiral into literal gang warfare. So
right.
it seems
I,
to me like he's going exactly as far as he needs to go, if not not far enough. You
Right.
know,
Let me. Do I have him in? Oh, I think I might have left him at home. I was gonna look for my Judge Dredd book and see if I could like just pick out one little. Oh, here they are. Let me just pull one out at random for people. Uh, Judge Dredd. Somebody cries out. He has a giant P on his chest and he's wearing a cape and a mask. And he punches Judge Dredd on the chin. Just goes whap. My card. Should you require our services, don't hesitate to call Punchogram. Remember, someone, somewhere is waiting a punch from you. And Judge Dredd immediately punches him in the face. At exactly 10 hours and 30 seconds, the Punchogram service went out of business. Dredd contacts control. Creep was hired by one Lon Propkiss, 1231 Grice Conaps. Pick him up. Sentence is 2 years. I don't know, says the Punchogram guy. You talk about enterprise. When a guy shows a little initiative, starts his own business, you step on him. There's an old saying in Mega City saying, Creep. Businesses come and go, but the cubes go on forever. Move! And he sends them to the ISO cubes. That is a random story in the volume collections that I happen to have, where a guy thinks it's a good idea to start a business punching people in the face.
that's actually so. Here's a fun fact. That is, it sounds very similar and might be based on a short story by Roald Dahl.
I believe it.
Roald Dahl had except with Dahl, that was literally the entire story was two guys say, "Hey, we will punch anyone you want in the face if you pay us," and someone pays them, and they just go up to someone, sock them in the face, and like collect the money. And then they go, "Wow, that actually worked," and the story ends.
Yep.
Uh, so it's pretty funny you say that. I wonder if he got the idea from the Roald Dahl story. Uh, but who knows, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's it's weird. Like you create. This is why with noir, it's kind of interesting because classic noir, or I should say like Raymond Chandler noir. Raymond Chandler is very clear when he talks about, and this, by the way, noir is very much relevant here because we're talking about worlds that are at the very least noir flavored, right? Like with the detectives, the moral
Mm-hmm.
corruption. These are at least noir flavored worlds. I would argue they're neo noir, both Watchmen and Judge Dredd. I would argue are neo noir, and if they're not, they're very much in the neighborhood of noir as a genre. So you look at Raymond Chandler and what he says about the noir hero. He considers the noir hero like he has to be basically a knight in a world of evil, right? He needs to be a moral paragon. Uh, Now this is what's interesting to me about Chandler's view of it. So that's how Chandler views his hero in noir, and for good reason. He has that idea of what his hero needs to be like. Dashiell Hammett, who probably was not the originator of noir, but was its first popular author, right? Like really, really, I should say, really, really popular author. Uh, Dashiell Hammett did not view noir that way, like at all. Uh, like at all, at all. Uh, so his books, like Red Harvest, for example, Red Harvest follows a hero called the Continental Op, and it's fascinating because the Continental Op, I think, in many ways, is a predecessor to characters like Judge Dredd. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if the Continental Op was the predecessor to Judge Dredd. Like, I would be very unsurprised if I googled Judge Dredd and they said, "Yeah, we were inspired by Red Harvest." Yeah. Uh, so in Red Harvest, the Continental Op is actually a Pinkerton agent. He is hired, and Red Harvest has one of my all-time favorite lines at the beginning. So he's investigating the murder of the last honest man in town. And when he's interviewing the guy's father, he's like, so he was married. Apparently, the guy married a Frenchman, and the father doesn't like it because she's a foreigner. And then he asks, so did he ever cheat on her? And the father answers, I should hope so. No son of mine should stay faithful to a Frenchman. He's like, but he probably didn't. He's honest like that. But anyway, so the Continental Op, like, eventually, the people who are interested in figuring out the murder, like, they're the people who they think did it, like, are already dealt with, and they tell the Continental Op, okay, you can go. We don't need you anymore. And the Continental Op, who has seen the depth of corruption and depravity in the town, says something along the lines of, no, screw all of you. I'm taking this whole thing down, right? I'm going to burn it down to the ground, and I don't care what it takes. And they were like, no, seriously, like, we want you to leave. And he's like, I was hired to catch the killer of this guy, and I am going to do it whether you want me to or not, because I've already accepted the money. And that's the plot of the book. Now, the Continental Op, it is worth noting, you could look him up, like, just Wikipedia has a good sketch of him. He's not a good guy, right? Like, he's certainly not a nice guy. He's not really the most moral person in the sense of, like, he has loose, shall we say, romantic morals. He is a master of deceit and lying, as I'm looking this up, you know. He's described as a monster, without any human foolishness like love in him. You know, so this is the Continental Op. And he is like one of the original noir heroes. But the Continental Op is a character you could root for because although he does not have, you know, petty things like emotions, and while he is willing to do whatever it takes, the ends always justify the means for the Continental Op. Nevertheless, he has principles that he will not violate. He hates corruption. He hates he hates crime. He hates murderers, and he will do anything it takes to solve his case. Right? He will
Right.
so he will solve the case. If he was hired to solve a case, he will always solve the case. So he becomes a character that you root for, because in the midst of a world where nobody has any principles or any morals, maybe the Continental Op is not a good person, but he's in a world where everybody else is worse. And he at least has some form of principles, right? He has something you can latch onto. And then you go into, like, Sam Spade. Right, in the Maltese Falcon.
Right.
Sam Spade is another one. He's not a good person. He was cheating with his partner's, was this his wife or girlfriend? I don't remember. It's been a while. But he was
I
cheating with
can't
his
remember.
what was that?
I can't remember.
Yeah, his partner's paramour. Right? He was cheating with his partner's paramour. But when everybody else around him is immoral, Sam Spade is dedicated to solving the crime. So you root for him, right? Dashiell Hammett has mastered this style of storytelling. The thing is, Dashiell Hammett was smarter than these other people because he wasn't dumb enough to say, hey, I don't know why people like these characters. They're actually villains. In fact, Hammett was doing it intentionally, right? He
Mm-hmm.
was intentionally creating characters that were not good people, but that he made sure the audience would root for by making them stand for something in a world where nobody else stood for anything. So it's an
Right.
interesting, yeah, it's an interesting dichotomy, like with Dashiell Hammett versus the modern writer. It's almost like that concept has been lost for whatever reason, and who knows why.
Right.
Right? Like, but Dashiell Hammett was doing it very intentionally. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he knew that he was basically manipulating the audience into liking his characters. But like, that was the point. His point was that was the trick to what he was writing. And nowadays, people are doing it by mistake. And my theory here is that it's because in the modern world, people have no morals,
Yeah.
right? Like, they don't understand what normal human beings admire, right?
Yes.
They don't understand. This is something. It's really bad. For example, in the MCU,
Yep.
right? This is a really like the one very very infamous and notable example came from like the recent Black Widow movie, when Red Guardian has to escape from a prison. So first off, Red Guardian is guilty of the crimes that he was sent to the prison for. Right? He was guilty.
Yeah.
Sure, was he betrayed to be sent there? Was it like was it fair that he got all of the blame shoved onto him? No, not really, but nevertheless, they didn't like lie about the crimes, right?
Yeah.
He was still he was the fall guy. That wasn't fair, but nevertheless, he was there. Second of all, he's extreme. Even if he wasn't guilty, he's extremely dangerous and very motivated to hurt people. Right? He
Yes.
is an immoral. He is at least an amoral assassin. Well, Black Widow and friends, yeah, need to break him out of prison. Okay, that on its own is not necessarily a bad thing for a story, right? Like you need an immoral guy, you need to break him out of prison. Where it becomes really messed up is first they're like knocking people out, fighting guards and whatever. And
Mm-hmm.
it was Mahler who pointed this out that like the guards did nothing wrong. Like they didn't do anything wrong. And then the really messed up thing is at the end of the scene, the prison is covered in an avalanche. And Mahler is like, I want to be very clear here about what you just witnessed as they whoop and cheer. We are never going to dwell on this moment again. We are not supposed to think of how it affects Natasha Romanoff's character. She just committed one of the most morally reprehensible things that we have seen any single human being do in the entire MCU. Like it's in the top 5. She just buried a prison in the snow.
Right.
It's like this is evil. It is despicable. Like they're going to starve. People are going to freeze to death. They might starve to death. And they're whooping and cheering, and you're just not supposed to think about it. And why? Like, how did this happen? Well, because in the MCU, she is the hero, right? So, since she is the hero, well, you're just going to accept that whatever she does and whatever reason she gives for it, they're probably good. They're okay. That's how they view it, right? And then it
Mm-hmm.
gets worse with characters like Miss Marvel or Captain Marvel, is a really bad one as well. Like, supposedly, I don't know as much details about this new Marvel's movie, but supposedly, like, she committed genocide or something. Uh, Honestly, I could believe it, but it's this moral sickness. So that's why you get characters. Alan Moore is a textbook morally sick person, right?
Yep.
He's extremely morally sick.
Oh
So
yeah.
this is why you get Alan Moore going like, I don't understand why people latch on to Rorschach. Well, yeah, you don't understand because your morals are warped, right? Like,
Yep.
it's not really that hard to understand. You could just ask
Yeah.
if you're really confused, right?
You could accept
Like,
the
it's not.
answer you're given too.
That's the thing, right? You need to accept the answer. It's like he hears the answer and he goes, "Oh, I don't like that answer." Well, okay, but that's
Cool.
because you're morally sick.
Yeah. You
It's
don't get
because
it.
there's something, yeah, there's something wrong with the way that you're thinking about this.
Yep.
You know, like the Rorschach is the most moral person in the world of Watchmen. And the fact that the creator of Watchmen doesn't realize it should tell you something about the creator. It's
Yes.
really disturbing. This is the same with Judge Dredd. I don't know if it was the original creator of Judge Dredd, whatever, but if a writer of Judge Dredd does not understand why people like Judge Dredd or The Punisher, that's
Yep.
another really good example,
Oh
right?
yeah.
And they don't understand why people like them, then that should tell you, wow, the people who are writing these stories, like, don't understand fundamental things about the way that the world works.
Yep.
Like, we're getting stories essentially written by maniacs.
Yep.
Like, I hate to put it that way, but that's pretty much that's the best way I can think of it.
Like if you look at Watchmen, like you see Doctor Manhattan basically give up on everything because it's all useless and everyone's gonna die and all this other nonsense. And you see, like could someone even say what the comedian and what Owlman's morality is? It's never put anywhere, and Owlman never does anything moral that anyone has ever talked to me about. Uh, then you look at things like, Ozymandias, with his, basic. I think he was wiping out most of the population of the world, some way somehow. Uh, I can't really remember exactly what he was doing because it was dumb. It was dumb when I read it, uh, and it's always felt dumb to me. So I can't really give you anything deeper than that. It's just some dumb morality, and then you have Rorschach going, "No, this is stupid. This is bad. This is evil. This isn't acceptable." And he gets killed for it by Doctor Manhattan of all people, for quite frankly dumb and stupid reasons that he didn't have to do it. But he's a god now, so he's above these petty things. He can hang out in Mars forever. He
Mhm.
can some god who can be lied to by the most obviously evil character in the series, Ozymandias. Uh, you know, it doesn't. It's one of those things where once you think about it, it ruins a lot of the story. And again, we're not even saying that Rorschach is a good person or anything like that. He just has a morality that he can stick to that isn't
Yeah, he stands for something.
right.
He might stand for technically the wrong thing, but what he's standing for is a hell of a lot better than the nothing. The moral consequentialism that leads to the deaths of however many people. This is why, like in the classic MCU, everybody criticizes uh Joss Whedon, right? And for good reason, he's not a
Yeah,
good person. But with that said, I've always been of the opinion that whatever you say about Joss Whedon, the man could write.
yeah,
Like he knew the basics of his craft. And that involves knowing something about how human nature works, right?
yep,
And even if like you don't want to acknowledge it, even if you're, a feminist lunatic, right, which is what Joss Whedon ended up being,
yeah.
uh,
A male
you need to
feminist.
yes, you need to understand something about human nature that you might not want to admit to yourself. This is why Joss Whedon, came in for rewrites on Captain America and gave him on some of his best lines, right? He's the
Yep,
one who had Captain America. He's the only person. It is notable, and I think a sign, like one of the reasons I still respect Joss Whedon as a writer, like contrary to a lot of people, is that it is Joss Whedon who put the line in is the only person who ever had Captain America reference God,
yep,
right? The Russo brothers didn't do it. And I love the Russo brothers' portrayal of Captain America. I think it's fantastic. I love Winter Soldier. It's one of my favorite movies. At least, certainly, like in my top two or three Marvel movies.
yeah,
Uh, it's a very good movie. But only Joss Whedon had Captain America reference God.
yeah,
And what you get in the early MCU is that Joss Whedon was somebody who did understand the difference between good and evil,
yeah.
right? And this starts to erode as the MCU goes on in really disturbing ways. And I do wonder, as much as like, yeah, Whedon is not our guy. He's always been an enemy. Buffy the Vampire Slayer was subversive, what was admittedly well written subversive propaganda from the beginning,
Yep.
right? Well written for what it was trying to do, but it was absolutely and always intentionally subversive propaganda. Uh, Firefly, I hesitate somewhat with that. It was written from a perspective of an arch libertarian, which we didn't seem to grasp, but did not hold that position. However, there were things in it that reflected Whedon's particular problems, like Inara and Mal's relationship never rang true. I think for a lot of people, right? It certainly did not for me. The way that they interacted with each other did not ring true, especially for a person like Mal. Uh, he did not need Anara to be a hang. He didn't need Mal doesn't need hangers on.
Right.
I what I'm saying, right? Like he's way too much of an alpha male, and certainly not prostitutes.
Sure. I
And
never I never really watched that show, so uh it just
I
never
do
was
like
on.
Honestly, I am a big fan of Firefly. Like it has some of my favorite episodes of television probably ever. Out of Gas, Objects in Space are both brilliant, and Serenity is a very good movie. I think I overrated it years and years ago, but it is a good movie. But even in retrospect, like yeah, it has its problems, but it's still a very good movie. So I do recommend Firefly. But uh, yeah, my point being that when you're in the era of Joss Whedon, the morality of the characters could was not sociopathic. Like, and what made me think of this was one of my favorite scenes in the whole MCU comes from Joss Whedon's Age of Ultron movie, right? When
Yeah.
Sokovia, the city, is falling from the sky. Uh, so this is a long battle sequence at the end of the film, but particularly the thing that I'm thinking of is they tell Captain America at one point that in order to stop Ultron and contain it here, then they're gonna have to let the city fall to the ground, and everybody there is going to die, basically, right? That they're gonna have to sacrifice the city to save the world, right? Now,
Yeah.
this is a horrible sacrifice that you would need to make. But Captain America reacts like a human being and not necessarily in like the cold, like, oh, you need to have this inhuman Vulcan logic. Captain America says, and again, like my one of my favorite moments in the whole MCU, he goes, "No, that's not an acceptable outcome." And then they go like, "No, we have to do it." And he's like, "No, I'm not doing that."
Yep.
He's like,
Yep.
I'm not letting all of these people die. It's not happening. You need to think of something else. Right? And that's when S.H.I.E.L.D. shows up and starts evacuating people. Uh, so it's a great scene. It's a great moment because it's very Captain America. Right? And it
Yeah.
shows, like, that's the difference between those moralities. It's not a consequentialist morality. He's not weighing numbers here.
Right.
Right? Captain America isn't going, okay, well, if we sacrifice a city, then we save 10 billion lives. He says, no, sacrificing a city is barbaric,
Yep.
right? And we're human beings. We don't do that, right?
Yeah.
Humans don't sacrifice, other humans facelessly, without their consent when they had nothing to do with it because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. That's not the human thing to do.
Yes.
And it's just the thing that was lost, and it's been lost by modern Hollywood in ways that like are very very disturbing. And it started, like, honestly, it started with more, right? Like it really did. It
Alan
started
Moore.
this
Yeah.
whole, yeah, it started with Alan Moore, at least in and this bled into, he was like the first tipping of the dominoes. And I don't think that he caused it, but I think he was the first sign of things to come.
Mm.
The fact that Moore got big, as big as he did, was a red flag.
Yeah.
Like it is very disturbing. Uh, and that's why, like, so we're going to talk about something that is related but different because we were talking about it beforehand, and I think this is a good enough time to segue. So there's another movie where this you see this sort of phenomenon. Uh, but it's an older movie. It's from the 70s. It's Dirty Harry. Dirty Harry actually originated a lot of these discussions on, oh, is he or is he not a hero? Now the difference is, once again, uh the difference is that Clint Eastwood created Dirty Harry as a hero, right? And
Right.
he was right. He was a hero. But it did spark debates over, like, oh, should we be viewing Dirty Harry positively? You got to remember that, like, all of these things that we're arguing about now, people were arguing about back then too. This whole, like,
Yep.
is he being too fascist, too right wing, too whatever, right? And Eastwood, I think we got to be careful in interpreting Eastwood as like a hashtag our guy, because he openly does not identify that way, and I think we should take people at their word,
Yep.
right? Like Eastwood claims to be a liberal, then very well, he's a liberal. He's not my ally. With
Yep.
that said, he is a
Well,
good
just as
filmmaker.
hold on, as an example, like if you look at Gran Torino, it's very clear that the value isn't placed on the main character's kids, or if he even has any, but rather on passing it on to some sort of like immigrant spirit that these quote reformed gangbangers, like these are not people who are on the right side of the law, can take from his lessons and stuff like that. And he dies giving it to them and not to, say, some
His own
white kids,
children.
his own children.
I think Gran Torino is a good movie, and I think he mentions his kids at one point. Like, basically, his kids don't talk to him, and he feels unappreciated by them. But
Yeah.
these guys from Laos, I think it was,
Yes.
right? These guys from Laos do appreciate him, and it's like I think it's a good movie. But you're right. Like, I want
The
to take
message
Eastwood
is
at his
is
word.
is not, as pro-American as some people want to say. The boomer in the end disinherits his own children.
Right, although he kind of in the movie is trying to interpret it as the children had already lost interest in him, but he's also
Mm,
not real. Like, we don't see any of the past that led up to this.
yeah.
Yeah,
And he's
so
such
we're
a
just supposed to
crusty character.
assume
I could believe that he, verbally abused his kids until they were like, "Oh, we're done with you."
that is almost certainly what happens. Seeing the pattern with boomers nowadays, so it is no coincidence that in a movie starring a boomer about a boomer, it would be his dirty old kill. It would be his ungrateful little shits of children who leave him behind, and the immigrants who need to carry on his legacy. It is kind of the quintessential boomer movie,
Yes.
but it's well made, and it
Yeah.
also has very good character work.
Oh yeah.
Like his arc is very good in the film. But that's neither here nor there.
It's just
So
one of those things where if people are thinking that he might be, pro-American, our guy,
hashtag our
etc.
guy,
Yeah, it's
Clint
like
Eastwood,
no, 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 not at all.
and yeah, I take Clint Eastwood at his word. He claims to be a liberal who leans left, and I believe him.
Yep.
So I would hesitate there. Uh, so going into like Dirty Harry. Uh, Dirty Harry is interesting. It sparked all of these debates at the time. A lot of the debates that we're having like right now. Now, Eastwood, to his credit, knew Dirty Harry was a hero. He didn't have that sort of moral sickness. But there were
Yes.
people who were like, "Hey, should we be accepting that this is the way to do things?" It was Roger Ebert who was the guy who kind of squared the circle here, because he says, "Look, Dirty Harry is fascist," and he has gotten a lot of flack for this. But I actually, I'm going. This is the hot take that I've had. Like, I've had this argument with people. I agree with Ebert. I think Dirty Harry is a great movie, but I think he's right. It is fascist in the sense of it's fascist in the sense of fascist meaning that he believes that the state should have more power to enforce its laws to the point of violating particular rights if it means protecting people, right? Like, I think that is the message of Dirty Harry. And Eastwood manages, and Ebert manages to square the circle. In, by the way, I want to emphasize a good review of Dirty Harry. He gave it 3 out of 4 stars, uh, like, and called it fascist in his review. But he says people will argue, well, no, he didn't really do anything wrong, though, because he had to do these things in order to catch the killer or whatever. It's like, well, yeah, he had to do these things because the creator of the movie created a world in which he had to do these things, right? Like, he intentionally set everything up in such a way that only by
Right.
violating people's rights could he catch the bad guy, you know. And
It,
true.
it's that total depravity thing again.
And there's a difference, though, between Dirty Harry and Judge Dredd and Watchmen. Watchmen and Judge Dredd, especially Judge Dredd, are in different play. They're not in our world, right? Like, at all, especially Judge Dredd. That is a fictional world that you could argue maybe represents some sort of dystopian future, but it's absolutely not our world as it exists today, right? And it's not meant to be. It looks different. People act different. It is different. Watchmen, too. Watchmen is very clear that there are divergence points in the history, that people have acted differently at certain points, and you should not accept this as a one-to-one recreation of the world of today. Right? Dirty Harry, though, is just presenting the world of today, except it's the world of today where those liberal pussies stop you from beating up suspects.
No,
Yeah.
not the liberals.
Right? Those stupid liberals stop you from beating up suspects. So, ooh, I just thought of something else to add on this, but I'm going to finish my tangent on because this made me think of something. But I'm going to finish this thing about Dirty Harry first. So, Yeah, so in Dirty Harry, notably, I've seen people make the argument, and this is where, and I disagree with them on this, that in Magnum Force, Eastwood sets the record straight. He claims, I never meant for this movie to be fascist. I want to make that very clear. So in Magnum Force, he has Dirty Harry say, I hate the system, but there isn't anything better, so I'm still going to stick by it. There is a problem with this, though. And the problem with this is that obviously and unavoidably, this is a retcon of the original movie. The original movie ends with Harry catches the bad guy who he's not supposed to be chasing. So he's already breaking the rules just by chasing the bad guy, right? Who has kidnapped a bus full of school children. So, right off the bat, you're supposed to be like anybody who would stop someone from rescuing a bus full of school children. And the anyone in this case is Reed, the government, right? Anyone, the government, who would stop you from rescuing a bus full of school children is obviously evil and insane, right? So, but Harry does it anyway. And then he gives his famous speech to the villain at the end of the movie. And the villain tests him, and Harry shoots him dead. Then, in the final shot of the film, he takes out his badge and throws it into the water. Now, you
Pretty
tell
clear.
me if there is any interpretation of this, because I can't think of any.
Right.
Any interpretation of this moment that isn't him going, I reject what the police force stands for. It doesn't protect people. I'm striking out on my own.
Right.
Because that is certainly what it looks like to me.
Right.
Like
I would
that,
agree with that too completely.
especially when you take it in with everything else in the movie. Basically, the system, the government, meaning the system, right, has been opposing Harry at every turn as he tries to catch the psycho, right, who is raping and murdering his way through the city. And then they're like, you tortured a guy, so now we got to throw out his confession. He's like, well, the guy just raped and murdered a 14-year-old girl. It's like, well, yeah, but that doesn't matter. You can't go chasing after him. And then he goes and he hijacks a bus full of children, right? Basically, the government is not acting in the best interests of the people, so Harry defies the government.
Wasn't he related to a politician or something, that serial killer? I seem to remember that. At least I thought he was.
It could be. Who knows? It doesn't matter. But it would make sense, I guess.
Yeah. Maybe I'm mistaking that for L.A. Noire, which was why the last killer is why the main character gets in trouble and is demoted.
So it's like, look, you could say what you want, and people do, but the fact of the matter is, if Harry is on the police force in the sequel, it's a retcon, right? It just is. That's clearly a retcon. He should not be in the police force. He very clearly threw his badge in the water. That is a sign that he rejects the police and what they stand for, right? He has identified them as failing, and he is striking out on his own. A proper sequel to Dirty Harry, one that didn't retcon the original story. I guess proper isn't quite right, because Magnum Force is actually a pretty good movie that I do recommend on its own merits. But a proper sequel to Dirty Harry would have seen him as a private investigator, right? That would have been the way to go with it. Harry would have been a private investigator, and then there would have been some reference to him being involved in multiple lawsuits or something, right? And Harry would have been like, yeah, so I left them behind, and now I work on my own. And honestly, if you really want to be smart about it, like, you would make the police then part of the villains, like, in the next movie.
Because they would go after him.
Yes. Eastwood didn't want to go there. And that's his prerogative. He doesn't need to. Right? Like, he could do what he wants. With that said, I think that Roger Ebert was right in his description of the story when he said that it was fundamentally a fascist movie. Because if you define fascist as the government, suggesting that the government needs more power to do what it has to take people down, right? To take down bad guys. Seems to me to be the message of Dirty Harry. Like, that the government should have the ability to violate people's rights. Uh,
Yep.
but it's a good movie in its own right. But you got to accept the philosophy of the film for what it is. Like you need to viewing the movie on its own merits. That's what I'm getting from it, and I
Right.
could be wrong, but I don't think so. Yeah.
Right. We're looking at this and we're going, we can't we can't fault Dirty Harry for being a dirty cop, quote unquote dirty cop. When the villain, literally just kidnapped a bus full of kids, and which I've seen some crazy stuff in St. Louis. I've heard of some crazy stuff in St. Louis. Like the mayor in St. Louis has been corrupt for at least 100 years. Like, there's corruption. Like pretty much, anytime a mayor comes into St. Louis, a new mayor, they bring their relatives and give them all jobs. Like it's not even a joke. It's not even
Mm-hmm.
a question, and they don't. St. Louis isn't new for this. The Albanian mafia is famous for filling out whole towns. That's part of the reason why they went after Kyle Rittenhouse so hard, is because the prosecutor was a Soros fed plant, and the entire family, it was basically one family running the prosecutor's office, running the mayor's office, running many of the different, setups here, there, everywhere. And they basically all decided at the same time, to go after Kyle Rittenhouse. And it's not even, nobody even hides it anymore, really. Uh, it's all the same with like tech companies and Indians, Hindu. Uh, they hire all their relatives. Their relatives don't really do anything. They're not really qualified. My dad deals with them all the time. These mafia things is nothing new to the world. But the thing is that at least with the mayor of St. Louis at that level, uh, if somebody takes a busload of kids, if somebody's a serial killer, they would do something about it. They have done some stuff about it in the past in St. Louis when certain things have happened and certain people have been murdered. They do take that very seriously. Drug crime, this and that, it took them probably a little bit too long to take down that auto ring that was stealing catalytic converters in the city. But, they did it. They took care of it. Even all our aldermen got arrested for corruption once, even though it's nothing new. Uh, all kinds of crazy stories. But even then, when it comes to something on the level of Dirty Harry or the average Judge Dredd villain, or um, how Watchmen goes, that's a level beyond, our uh, our real world, at least in most functioning places. We're taking, we can see what's happening in Ecuador where there's violence in the streets because the Ecuadorian, I don't know if they have a president or prime minister or whatever, but he tried to follow Bukele's example of cleaning out El Salvador by creating a police state. It turns out the saying, if you're not committing crimes, you have nothing to fear, is a very real statement. There's no, and to satirize it, but then have the people very much deserving of it, but then put down the hero is always somewhat illogical. Like even though, it probably makes sense, if you beat a confession out of a guy, you can't use it. Uh, but the thing is that the confession turned up the corpse of a young girl. You know, sure, they can't use the confession, but there's definitely things they can do with that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. It's the whole movie was. I mean, it's a great movie. I highly recommend it. Dirty Harry is a classic for a reason. But it I think that you got to accept the movie's philosophy on its own terms, right? Like, I am willing to like and enjoy shows with a consistent philosophical premise that I don't agree with necessarily 100%, right? I do all the time. I appreciate shows for having a consistent philosophy. Frankly, a lot of Miyazaki is a good example of this. The only explicitly Christian Miyazaki movie is Porco Rosso. Uh, and I would argue that Porco Rosso is very much explicit in the fact that it has Christian themes and you're meant to take it from that perspective. But it's the only one, right? Everything else is Shinto. Now,
Yep.
I don't think that Shinto, or at least most of them, maybe I'm missing something off the top of my head, but most of them are Shinto, right? Now, I am not Shintoist, and I don't think that Shintoism represents the truth. However, I can appreciate having a consistent philosophy in place at the core of his films, right? Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood is another example. It is my favorite show, right? Like, I
Mm-hmm.
think it's a masterpiece. Uh, I don't agree entirely with its central philosophical premise. I do think that there's some nuance there, right? I think that so what you get early in Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood is you have the scene with the comical priest, and it's actually one of the more brilliant things that Full Metal Alchemist does because it literally tricks you, the viewer, into thinking it's going to go this way. And some people are still fooled by it, which I don't think is the fault of the show because the show could not be more clear what its real point was, which it makes very soon. But you have this episode early on with the comically evil priest, Father Cornello, and
Mm.
Ed, who has literally met God, calling himself an atheist, uh,
Right.
in front of him. Now, Ed is not necessarily being inconsistent because what he's saying is really something along the lines of, I have met the being that you all would consider God, and he did not impress me. Right? Like, I
Right.
don't consider this being God. But it definitely would come across on your first viewing, and did to me, as wow, this was going to be a really annoying, like, Reddit tier, yeah, atheism type, or our atheism sort of show, right? Like,
Right.
this is how it feels about religion. But to people who stick with it, there is a kind of a twist here, right? And the twist comes with the Shao Tucker arc. The entire point of the Shao Tucker arc is that Ed thinks he is a better person than Father Cornello, but someone who holds to the exact same philosophical principles that Ed claims to hold, who believes in the philosophy of scientism, that everything can be explained through science, and science is the fundamental explanatory power in reality, right? It has the fundamental explanatory power in reality. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
somebody that is Ed's philosophy. He is very like he holds it very strongly. He feels very strongly about it. And that's one of the reasons that he gravitates so much to Shao Tucker, because it's somebody who seems to be on the same wavelength as him. And that person does something absolutely despicably evil,
Yep.
right? Like, one of the most evil things that any character.
You there, Anthony? Uh, yeah. Let's just take a few comments while Anthony comes back. I'm sure he'll be back in a second. Uh, Bradford Walker says, I cannot believe how badly public education has fallen, that people do not get parody or satire and haven't been taught how to do it properly for most of a century. Simon Hogwood, an auspicious number for the discussion, referencing the 40K views. Bradford Walker continues. The folks at 2000 AD, that is the publishers of Judge Dredd, tried to talk to the audience into seeing Dredd as the.
Red as the
You there?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I have no idea why it dropped me. As far as I know, absolutely nothing changed, and it just stopped detecting my microphone until I went back in and like went out and went in again. It was weird. Where did I get cut? At what point did I get cut off?
You were talking about how evil Show was without mentioning
Right.
what he did.
Yeah, the point I was trying to make with that was that
Okay.
Hiromu Arakawa was making an argument against, and he transmutes his daughter into a chimera, but the
Right,
but
right.
the the point of Hiromu Arakawa including this was that, oh wait, blind belief in science and clinging to it as your belief system, the explanatory power of the universe also doesn't work, because any belief system that you accept uncritically, uh, that you don't constantly and that where you don't constantly re-examine your biases, uh, if followed blindly, can lead to moral atrocities, right?
Yep.
Like, that's the point of what she's saying. Now, with that said, Hiromu Arakawa does not seem to be religious, and that doesn't seem to be the ultimate philosophy of Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood.
Isn't
But
she
I can
Catholic?
appreciate. No, she's not.
Oh, never
Definitely
mind.
not.
Oh,
Uh,
oh, I'm thinking of the
Trigun
Trigun guy.
creator is.
Never mind. Yeah.
Yeah, Yasuhiro Naito. He's like a Catholic. He's like a Buddhist slash Catholic. Like, he's a Catholic with Buddhist leanings, or a Buddhist with Catholic leanings. But his stories all have a very Catholic flavor to them, uh, which makes them interesting in that way. But anyway, no, Hiromu Arakawa is not Catholic, like, pretty obviously. However, I can appreciate Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood for having a consistent point of view, right? Like, I don't need the point of view to be the one I necessarily hold. I don't need that point of view to be like, yeah, it doesn't need to be something that I 100% agree with, as long as you consistently present it and with enough nuance that it makes sense, right? Like, series of unfortunate events is another one where I can respect it as a consistent worldview of a world without God, frankly, right? Like, a world where morality exists but God does not.
Right.
That's the world of a series of unfortunate events. And in that sense, I actually can appreciate a series of unfortunate events for presenting me a consistent view of what this world would look like,
Right.
right? Uh, and same with Arakawa. So I go through all of that to say that, like, I don't necessarily agree that the police should have the power to torture suspects, to, yeah,
Right. Right.
but, or that, right, police should have the power to just disobey their superiors when they feel like it, if the threat is sufficient. But I can respect the portrayal of a fictional world in which these sorts of things make sense.
Yes. Yeah.
So there you go.
And
That
it.
was my point.
Yeah. I gotcha. So. Yeah.
Yeah, Reverend Walker says that he's been thinking of relocating abroad a few years, at least half time. So the problem is, and I've had this conversation with my own family, the problem is almost everywhere abroad is actually in a worse spot than the USA. Like, and the USA itself, like, don't get me wrong, it is not doing well, right?
Right.
But there are at least spots that you can move to in the USA where, dots of sanity. I'm not sure if there are any in Europe. Even Poland just went woke recently. Maybe Hungary is left. Um, People are gonna
Mm,
want to say Russia, but I don't believe it. Uh,
Russia has a pretty bad thing coming in. Even though he banned a lot of the homosexual activity that is rife in many different locations, it's very probable that Putin acted too late, and things aren't going to go well for them after after too long.
yeah, I just, like, I'm pretty suspicious of Russia overall.
Well,
Like,
it's yeah. Sorry, go for it.
my point being that there's really nowhere that I would want. This is just general to Bradford. Like, we've thought about it, and there's really nowhere that I've been wanting to relocate, that I would want to relocate, that I think would actually do better than
Right.
the United States. Uh, which is not to say the United States will win the wars, but, like, I would rather live in a scene patch here than in, like, China or something.
Right.
And I know, like, oh, but China's gonna be the big victor in the wars. Well, they might be. right? But
Right.
that doesn't mean I want to live there. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
And it's foreigners who think they can just move from one place to another. Well, these places still have identity that we're not allowed to have in the United States. So it's they'll have no problem sending you to a hellscape that you abandoned and gave the middle finger to on the way out, and people are going to remember. Um, I had friends who went to Vietnam, and I tried to go myself. And in the end, God told me in a very direct manner that I was to stay here in the United States, come what may. Visiting and whatever, But this is my home. This is my place. Uh, the people who went out there, that I saw, who aren't, Instagram models living their life or whatever, they're just, they started families. They, make enough money to do very well for themselves in Vietnam. But the actual Vietnamese guy came back to the United States because, one, the United States offers incredibly low cost loans to immigrants. And, like, we're talking less than 1%
Hmm.
interest rates. And they get, if you disappear back into your home country, you don't have to pay those back. Uh, you're just never going to pay, like you could get hundreds of thousands of dollars and never pay it back. As long as, you wait certain time frames and stuff like that. And secondly, the standard of living in the United States is still better than in Vietnam. Sure, there's some bad things about it. Uh, Vietnam has certain amenities for a bachelor that might be very appealing that simply aren't in the United States right now. There's also plenty of cheap things to buy there, and if you're of a significantly soulless capitalistic mindset, a man could do very well for himself. But at the same time, you know, like again, if there's an actual war against the U.S., they'll have no problems sending you back. And if they can, they'll accuse you of spies and torment you until you give in and become a white monkey. Like what they do in China, where they basically have these people roam around and spout CCP propaganda who come from the United States. You also have what's another one? Like what? Where would you go? South America? Even though people like Bukele and Milei are starting to get into charge, Brazil still went full, corruption, and things are starting to get pretty ripe for military coups, both for Argentina and Brazil and other places. And quite frankly, military men have never been good at economics in the same way uh, uh, that an actual person who isn't going to mess around with the economics would be. People are decrying Milei for the inflation that's ravaging Argentina now, but he just got into power a month ago. I don't think you can ruin a currency in a month just by slashing costs and unleashing some laws and then going against the Fed or the Argentinian Fed. Like Canada has no free speech. Quite frankly, some of the
Hmm.
things that I've said online are criminal in Canada. And I want to be very clear here. I haven't really said anything crazy. Uh, and England's almost the same way. Eh, there's crazier, Anthony. There's crazier. I'm like the top level, the cream of the crazy. Uh, the best part of the milk, if you will. Uh,
Yeah, of course.
yes. Anyway, sorry. And then it's like, what? Look down at Mexico. Well, Mexico is mostly cartels. Like, there are places where you can live very comfortably. Don't get me wrong. You keep your head down, you don't get noticed. You're going to be fine. But, Japan is importing immigrants now. Mongolia is either Russia or, like there's a joke in Mongolia. What's the capital of Mongolia? Russia or Beijing, depending on the time of the year. Uh, like India is not getting any better. They are not turning into a superpower. Uh, you know, And I don't mean to really put you on blast, Bradford. I'm sorry, but it's hard for me to kind of look at the world and go, am I actually doing better over there than here? And my answer that I always get to is no, I can't really do better for all of America's problems, than here. And secondly, there's and this is more important, by the way. Like that was the prelude to the actual important thing, which is where does the Lord want us to be? I know you. I believe you mentioned in the past that you're a Christian, Bradford. We serve the Lord. As whatever problems we have, and we all have our own problems in all of our battles, the Lord tends to put us in specific places, both for our benefit and for the benefit of others. I'm meeting somebody Tuesday morning at 6 a.m. to have breakfast and sort of discuss what I can do to serve the Lord and to sort of help the next generation of
Woohoo.
pastors. My goal is to create a podcast, sort of like Pints with Aquinas. I might call it something like Gatekeepers. And the goal is to interview young pastors and see where they are in the faith and what they're planning to do and what they believe the Lord will use them for. Uh, the goal of this is not to mimic with Aquinas. I don't do anything for money except work for 8 hours a day and then occasionally do my bouncing job. And quite frankly, I probably do that for a meal. I mean, a big meal, but a good meal, but a meal. Uh, just because I like being cruel to people, very dark deeds, and then I get to throw them out of the bar. Uh, but we have to ask ourselves, where the Lord is taking us. Why hasn't the Lord done this? Why hasn't the Lord done that? Well, that doesn't really matter, because human tragedy is all part of the equations too. My brother died last year. Guess what? I've used his death to witness to hundreds more people than I did before because people would ask me, hey, why are you depressed? My brother died. He's in heaven, but I'm still sad about it. And then I can talk to them about the faith my brother had in Jesus Christ. Like even the evil that we experience is an opportunity to witness and serve the Lord. Um, and anyone who says differently does not understand, what the Lord is bringing. We should, earn our money, earn our bread, and all this other things. But, you know, like at the job I'm at, I hate it. I hate the people there. There's some really bad experiences. But
I
the same,
enjoy that you're saying this on the record.
yeah, pretty much. Like I like some of the managers, I like most of the people, but there's some bad parts to it. Uh, you know, if but then all of a sudden a new Christian came in, and he and I have been talking about the Christian life, and I've been able to share with him my experiences, my thoughts, and my struggles, and I was able, and he's done the same as well, and it's sort of pushing him, to a more spiritual aspect. He understands the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Now, how to move to live it. So I figure that even though, some things have been really bad, God was probably keeping me there so I could help this guy, and push him along, keep him on the right path in some ways. Um, and there's been other experiences in my life where even though they've been bad, and even though they, would not have been tolerated by other people in other situations, uh, I've been there and I've spread the gospel or done some service, or I'm the only one who calls a certain person. I visiting widows and orphans in the hospital and all this jazz. Like there's so much we can do to serve the Lord here. If you're not serving the Lord here, and this goes out to generally everyone, uh, how in the world will you be able to serve in a place and language in a place that you don't speak the language as well as the natives? You you know you aren't going there to be a missionary. This random touristy person. My friends aren't Christian in Vietnam, but it's not like they'd witnessed there anyway. They went there to find women and live a better life in Vietnam. They were willing to give up the comforts of America for it. You know, would I witness in Vietnam? I think the answer would be no. So it's even though it's very attractive to look at other places, think about other places, the prayer shouldn't be, Lord, take me out of this godforsaken hellhole. We're going down to hell in a handbasket, civil war and worse, and we're ruled by, all sorts of horrible people, who are almost certainly, pedophiles and monsters, and, their children are crack-addled James Bond wannabes, and, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know, it's sort of the heroic virtue we talked about last week. What can we do to exhibit it in our daily lives? Even though I grind my teeth when I have to interact with people, in certain situations in my job because they make it unpleasant for me to interact with them. There's still that opportunity I have to witness to them and to make sure that when they spout their atheist nonsense, because the guy who afflicts me is an atheist, that I go, no, 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 that's dumb. You're dumb. You are incorrect in the entirety. That is not what Christians believe. And maybe I've ruined it because he and I feud, but it's like, it's the opportunities that are there. There's nobody like this, that what I just described, in any of the worlds that we've been talking about today. Uh, Anyone who shows up who's religious is going to be corrupt. I can't think of a single time there that some religion is mentioned in Judge Dredd in a positive light. The people are degenerate, monsters. Or Dirty Harry. I'm sure that some villain somewhere was a pastor. I know in a lot of the what's that Burt Reynolds series about him taking revenge? Uh,
I have no idea.
I know what it is. It's like his wife and daughter keep getting murdered. I shouldn't laugh, but it happens, to the single guy quite a bit. But it's like a lot of the villains are, stand-up members of society. Uh, you know, you can't, there's no point where the corruption doesn't exist, where evil isn't dominant, that, things aren't worrisome. In Judge Dredd, they have cults to Judge Death, who is the literal Grim Reaper of that universe, or one of them, and one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. He just kills everyone he comes across. And Judge Dredd is the only one of moral fortitude who can stare him down. I remember in the uh, before I stopped watching it, that Castlevania series, where it's like, the demons are like, God's not going to come for you, and it's like, of course not. It's it's a town of evil with a church of evil with an evil pastor standing on an evil pulpit. They were degenerate. They're totally depraved. Somebody released some uh, clips of the Has-Been Hotel, which has a plot point of angels coming down to cull hell because hell is full. But from other series in the same universe, we see the second they walk out into the real world that everyone's totally depraved. Nobody's seeking God. Nobody's living righteously. Or maybe they can't show the living righteously part because, the demons are naturally repulsed by holy auras. But it's very clear that the angels, quote unquote, from heaven, are not angels at all. They're just demons of light, like Satan acts, tormenting other demons in hell and the sinners and the unrepentant. And in my personal belief, Charlie, the maker of the Has-Been Hotel, which is to reform the demonic, is merely a false hope for people who are truly unrepentant, because that one character who changes their gender is certainly not going to repent of that, knowing the creators.
I have nothing to add.
Yeah, like if the people and the things and the spirit of these things weren't so depraved, weren't an absolute Calvinist wet dream, maybe these creators who are complaining of how people treat their work, uh, would have a point. I'm waiting for the drama about Has-Been Hotel to make a fever pitch when you realize that everyone in hell are insane, unrepentant lunatics who rejected God, rejected their born sex, rejected their sexuality at birth, and so on and so forth for their sin and shame. And then you realize that they're all in hell because they rejected God, making Has Been Hotel one of the most theologically sound shows ever made by their ilk. Uh, don't
I
watch it.
mean,
Don't
I
watch it
mean,
though. But
you're not wrong.
I'm not wrong. All the cool quirky people are in hell, quote unquote. Not quote unquote for hell, cool and quirky, quote unquote. You know. Do you want to do better? Yeah. Do you want to give up your transgenderism? No, that's bad. We're not going to make him do that for repentance. By the way, that would be something I'd probably be arrested for in Britain and Canada. Me just saying that. But,
Yes.
it's all good. Better to stand. Oh, wait. Here it is. Here's coming full circles. Better to live and stand on your morals than kill your soul for the mob. How about that, Anthony?
Based.
Yes. Do you have anything to add at all?
At this point, I've pretty much said the piece that I want to say.
Yeah.
Look, my point is that I am okay with presenting a consistent philosophical worldview,
Yeah.
even if I don't agree with it, presented in a fictional way, right? The problem that I have, or one of several problems, but one of the problems that I have with a lot of these shows and things like Has Been Hotel and whatever is that they're not actually presenting a consistent philosophical worldview. They're presenting a contradictory philosophical worldview or a nonsensical philosophical worldview that falls apart. Something can be logically consistent and untrue, right? The thing is, if
All
it's
the time.
logically consistent, yeah. See, the thing is though, if it's logically consistent, it needs to accord with reality in at least some way, so I can connect with it, right?
Right.
A lot of what we're seeing here, like Black Widow, for example, going back to that scene in Black Widow, where Mahler points out that she commits one of the most morally reprehensible acts on screen that we ever see anyone do in the MCU, right?
Right.
This is completely true. The thing is that, like, even if we're well, we're in a world where that is no longer evil, okay, how does that make sense? Right? Where are you justifying this from?
Right.
Where
Why
are
is
you getting
Thanos
this
still
back?
evil?
Right. Why is Thanos evil? Are you going to explain this? Was he evil? Do you guys actually think he was evil?
Right.
I mean, to be honest with you, one of the issues that I had with Endgame, which I thought was a good finale, I think Endgame works as a finale if you think of it as it wasn't perfect, but it ended the story, right? And that's where the story ends, and nothing that happened after really matters, right? Like, it's not a perfect ending, but it's a good ending, and it works as an ending. Uh, you know what I mean?
Right. I understand what you mean. It does
But
exactly what it needed to do.
yes, with flaws, but enough,
Right.
certainly enough. And Endgame, one of the issues that I had with it though was its new portrayal of Thanos. It felt like they had forgotten the things that made the original Thanos interesting.
Yep.
Thanos was a person who had a heroic will, right? He
Yep.
did evil things. He was an evil person because his will was misdirected, right? His moral judgment was askew, but he had a heroic will. The genius of Infinity War, and I do say genius, I think the MCU in its prime was very good, right? The
Yeah.
genius of Infinity War was that Thanos was the protagonist of the story, right?
Yeah.
He really was. He was the character that everybody else was pivoting around, and he was the character who was trying to accomplish something while everybody else's goal was to stop him from accomplishing his goal. And
Yep.
not only that, he succeeds in the end. He shows that he has the heroic will to succeed. So yes, I think that Thanos in Endgame, that's what made him an interesting character. He admired, in some ways, the people who tried to stop him. He recognized that they had a different point of view than him, that they were never going to agree. He was completely sure in his convictions that he was right and that he had to do what he was attempting, right?
Yep.
That killing half the universe was an absolute necessity and he had to do it. But he respected the people who opposed him, knowing that in his mind, well, they can never understand what I'm doing, but I understand it. And so I can respect the people who oppose me for trying to push their point of view, even if I'm not them. Like, there is a moment in the film where Doctor Strange uh, makes a deal with Thanos. He'll give him the time stone, if he spares Iron Man's life, and he does. And it's notable that afterward, when Thanos snaps his fingers, Iron Man not only survives the attack from Thanos, he survives the snap,
Yep.
right? Because Thanos has a sense of honor. That's
Yep.
the point of the character. He has a sense of honor. And there's another moment in the story where he's fighting Captain America, and Captain America is trying to prevent him from closing his glove, and you can see that Thanos actually looks impressed. Again, Steve survives the snap. You
Yep.
know, it's one of those things where it's like, why did Thanos leave these characters alive? Wouldn't it have been easier on him? Wouldn't it have made his life easier if he had killed them later? And the answer is they don't say it directly, but it is very easy to yeah, it is very easy to intuit that he probably kept them alive because he respected their fighting spirit. This is something that you could do when you have a good moral grasp of your villain,
Yep.
right? Like, when you have a good moral grasp of your villain, you can make them do despicable things and still make them interesting because you understand that having certain good qualities does not necessarily make you correct or even a good person. Serenity, the movie Serenity, the Firefly movie,
Mm-hmm.
right? It did a similar thing with its villain, the Operative. The Operative was a great villain, absolutely fantastic, and it was played by Shuadol Ejiofor, who's a fantastic actor. Uh, he has a fantastic scene with Mal where he's talking about how basically he just massacred like an entire planet because he was, or at least the entire base on the. I think it was just the base on the planet. He didn't kill the whole planet, but he massacres a base on the planet because he's looking for Mal. So these people might be harboring Mal, so he kills them all, right? Uh, and when Mal confronts him about this, he's like, you know, what, are you insane, basically? And he goes, look, you're trying to prevent the Alliance, the government, from making a better world. Think Thanos, right? Like, I have to do this in order to make sure that better world can happen. And he goes, you can't be part of that world either. You just did something evil that you know. And he says to Mal, of course I did. He's like, Mal, you're absolutely right. I'm a monster. This world isn't for me. He's like, I'm not creating this world for myself. I am doing the evil that is necessary to create a better world for everybody else. Which is a brilliant moment in the story because it helps you to understand the nature of the villain. He's
Mm-hmm.
essentially Thanos. He's a radical. He's a true believer, right?
Right. He has those
Genuinely,
A10 eyes.
yes, he has the heroic will to accomplish what he's doing. He
Yep.
genuinely believes that he is making the world a better place with his actions, as despicable as they are, and he will do anything in his power to accomplish it, including damn himself, which is what Thanos does, right? He
Yep.
kills his daughter, you know, and it's the same thing. He shows he has the heroic will to accomplish his goals, up to and including damning himself to do it. Now, in Serenity, the operative actually manages the crew of the Serenity. The climax of the movie is that the Serenity crew gets proof that the Reavers were created in a government experiment by the Alliance government, which are like the space zombies. Yeah.
Yes.
So Mal gets proof of this, and he decides they're going to go to a certain spot in the galaxy and broadcast it so that it becomes common knowledge. And that's like the climactic moment of the movie. And the operative is trying to stop them. Well, Mal, after he defeats the operative, instead of killing him, in another great moment of the film, when he realizes that the operative is a true believer, so he ties him up, right? And he says, "What are you going to?" And he goes, "What are you doing to me?" And Mal says, "I'm going to show you your world without sin," because that's what the operative was trying to create, right? Like, I'm going to create this world with no sin. And he forces the operative to watch the proof that the Reavers were created by the government that the operative is fighting for. And the operative calls off the troops who are about to kill the Serenity crew.
Yep.
Right? So once again, it's a brilliant moment in the film. This is why, as much as Serenity does have its flaws, it's certainly not a perfect movie. And I probably overrated it when I was younger. I do think it's still a very good movie because it shows it's somebody who has seen that the cause that he is fighting for, that he thought was true. Like, it shows ultimately that the operative was not a cookie cutter villain, right? Like, he wasn't doing this. In reality, you could have easily made it that the operative didn't really care if the Alliance was right? He was just a sadist. He sees the Alliance proof and he goes, "Oh, well, then I guess I'm fighting for you." But that's not what they do. The operative sees the proof that he was wrong and he backs down because the operative wants to be the good guy.
Yes.
Right? He thought he was fighting for the right side. And when he learns he was wrong, he is no longer interested in fighting for that side. One of the lines that I really didn't like in the new movie, he has, so when they meet in Endgame, I mean, right? The sequel to Infinity War, and where I was going with all of this. In Endgame, when the new Thanos, the alternate universe Thanos goes up, they kind of take away everything that made Thanos interesting as a character.
Yep.
Right? Thanos is a person who respected heroes, who respected bravery, who respected the people that stood up to him, who understood that even though he thought that they were wrong, he was absolutely sure of it, in fact, he nevertheless had enough of a moral core that he could see that their fighting spirit was admirable in some way, right?
Yep.
To the point where he would negotiate and make deals with them. Well, in the new one, he has a line that's really weird. First, he says that he was wrong about killing half the universe since they could never forget the old world. Instead, he'll just destroy the world down to the atoms and recreate a new one. This is fine. In fact, this is good. I really like this scene. I don't have a problem with that bit. What I have a problem with is later when he's fighting Captain America and Captain America manages to, get a few blows in, right? He says something along the lines of I'm not doing this to you because I enjoy it, but I will enjoy it very much. And I'm like, why did you include that line?
Yep.
That's not what he was like in the original. It changes the character of Thanos and it makes him less interesting. Because originally Thanos was portrayed as a person who respected heroic fighting will opposed to his own. Now he's just somebody who is likes being evil, right?
Yep.
Like Captain America fights him. Like if it were me writing that scene, I would have had him go, "What's your name?" And then when he said it, when he goes, "I will remember," and then he'll say something like, "I will remember you when I create the new world." Right? Honor him in some way. Like, wow, your fighting spirit is very impressive. I will make sure that when the new world is created, I will remember that. Though nobody else will, I will remember this moment, right?
Yes.
In honor of you. But that's not what they do. And it's sort of like, it was the first cracks, I think, in what was coming. The real first cracks were in Captain Marvel,
Yes.
which was like a total mess morally and on many different levels,
Yep.
right? But Endgame had more of these cracks where it's like they seemed like they forgot or misunderstood why people liked the character of Thanos. And I think that the reason for that is because they forgot or misunderstood or maybe they never really knew and it was just smoke and mirrors and they got lucky. Who
Yeah.
knows, right? Uh, what makes a good villain, right?
Yeah.
Like, you need somebody who, although they could be evil, they could be despicable, but they should have some fundamental basis in, like, human reality, which Thanos did,
Yes.
right? He was trying to do something evil. He was trying to do something despicable. He was also, if you really think about it, doing something that made no sense. Because as many people pointed out, with the Infinity Stones, why didn't he just double the universe's resources instead of having the population? Uh,
Right. I
which
mean,
is, yeah,
yeah.
very obvious. Uh, and obviously could have solved the problems, but that's neither here nor there. The point is that the movie put in the work to make it so that you believe that this is something that Thanos believed.
Yes.
But Thanos was still grounded in a human reality because he still valued things that were genuinely valuable. He valued fighting spirit. He valued honor, right? He was honest in a sense. Like, he kept his word. He did
Yeah.
not lie to people. He enjoyed a fair fight. Like, there is a great moment in Infinity War where he fights the Hulk, and one of the great things about that scene is that the rest of the army is about to step in, and he pushes them to the side because he wants to beat the Hulk one-on-one. This is an understandable as human impulse,
Yep.
right? It is, hey, I need to prove my strength against this creature. Even with other, and although I might have an unfair advantage, I am not going to use that advantage because I need to prove that I have that strength.
Yep.
Like, and this is the thing that was lost in Endgame. It was a little weird. Again, this is all like, I think that Endgame overall as a movie worked in the sense that for a finale, it did everything it was required to do to properly end the story.
Yes.
If the MCU had stopped with Endgame, then the MCU would have been remembered fondly, but it didn't, right?
Yep.
And now it's in retrospect that you could look back and you could start to see the cracks forming, right? Of,
Yep.
okay, so what exactly was admirable, and then what they do with Thor. I've even seen people criticize the ending with Steve, that, like, oh, Steve wouldn't do that. I don't agree, but I sort of get it too. Uh, Ultimately that movie is carried by the fact that Iron Man sacrifices an extremely well done end to his entire character arc. Like, to be
Yep.
honest with you, I think that the entire movie is kind of driven off that point that if you were invested in the character of Iron Man, then the ending to his story was very satisfying.
Yeah.
So, there's and that's not nothing, right? In a sense, that's the most important thing that the movie had to do, was provide satisfying ends for its main characters.
Yep.
You know, and it did that. But the MCU, unfortunately, is now run by maniacs, and so is all of Hollywood.
Yep.
It's one of the reasons too that Godzilla minus one did so well, right? Godzilla minus one, and actually, this is another good example. Godzilla minus one stars a character, Koichi, Shikishima, I think is his last name. It stars a character, Koichi, who was a kamikaze pilot who chickened out and couldn't do it, right?
Right.
And everybody hates him for it, with some justification and some that's unfair, right?
Yeah.
Like,
You didn't commit suicide for the Emperor?
right,
Mm.
on one hand, you didn't commit suicide, but they have it's really interesting, and this is not a flaw of the movie. It's just me, like, it made me wonder as I was watching it. Like, there's a scene where he comes home and the neighbor goes, Koichi, you're alive? And she's like, Shug goes, but I thought you were a kamikaze pilot. And then he just has this look on his face, and you can see the realization dawn on her, and she slaps him across the face. And then she goes, because of you, all of my children are dead. And it's a great moment. It's very powerful. But it also made me go, like, I wonder, though, that she says that because she's also still alive,
Yeah.
right? Like, nobody asked her to do it, right?
Yep.
Nobody asked you to kill yourself. You asked him to kill himself. And because he committed the sin of doing what you're doing right now, meaning living, right? This is how you react to him. But there's a difference, the
Yeah.
way that they saw it. He had a duty and she didn't.
Yep.
right?
Her duty was to make the sons who would, you know, uh,
Fight the war.
fight the war. So it's like, she did her part.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's just an interesting moment because it does make me think of like, like with all of that said, it's kind of rich for you because like nobody asked you,
right.
right? This is not a flaw of the movie. In fact, it's a talking point. I think it's a good thing. Like it's interesting to think about, you know. Uh, and Godzilla minus one is a masterpiece. Unironically, it is legitimately like it is an outstanding movie. Uh, but it's another movie that requires a sort of knowledge of human nature and morality that Hollywood completely lacks. Like the way that Koichi makes that character work, he could very easily be an incredibly unlikable character, even a despicable character.
Yep.
At the very least, someone you don't want to follow. Right? Like, okay, I understand why he didn't kill himself, but like I'm following a coward. Like, is this really the
Right.
guy who I want to be the lead of the movie? However, the movie makes this work by understanding his internal conflict so well. And the acting. The actor does a really good job with it. Like, there is never a point in the movie where you don't feel horribly bad for Koichi because Koichi really sells that, like, his actions during the war, are absolutely torturing him. Like, he is being eaten up on the inside of it, on the inside by this, and he has other good qualities. And part of the point of the movie is that like they make a point of showing that Koichi is actually a very good pilot and a very good shot, which means like if you think about it, it would have been an idiotic waste to use him as a kamikaze pilot, right?
Right.
Like it makes absolute like you're literally just destroying a resource for absolutely no reason. Like Koichi is a good pilot, a good shot. He is more useful to you alive, and you're trying to kill him. Yeah, which I'm sure is the point of showing us that he's such a good pilot and such a good shot, right?
Yes.
Uh, that's part of that, but that's something that Japanese media can still do that Hollywood cannot, right? Like, how do you make a character like this work? Well, it takes an understanding of human nature, a certain empathy for people who are not you, who are going through difficult situations, right? You need to like in order for this guy to work as a character, to work as a protagonist, then you need to be able to look at him and be like, I don't know if that's a good thing that he did, but I totally understand why he did it, and I totally understand that he regrets it, right?
Right.
And why he regrets it. And I understand why he would do it, right? It takes people who know human nature. Hollywood couldn't do this character. They just couldn't,
Yeah.
right? This character could not be done. Like I can't even imagine how they would even try and do it.
They would
Like
justify him some way, like, oh, you chickened out, but that's okay. Not
and they
everyone.
sort of like it's kind of interesting because they sort of do this in minus one, but not nearly like that ham-fistedly. Because
Right.
part of the point of it is that like the Japanese government is treating lives with way too callously,
Yes.
right? Like, and this is they mention like from the flimsy planes to the fact that they use kamikaze pilots. Like they don't value the lives of their own citizens for
Yes.
throwing them away in an unwinnable war. And this is a good commentary. So there is a sense, and by the end of the movie, uh, Koichi chooses not to kill himself. Like he's going to sacrifice himself to kill Godzilla, but instead he chooses to fight Godzilla, but not kill himself. Sorry for the spoiler, but I got to talk about it for the context of all of this to make sense.
Yes.
Uh, he chooses not to do it. So there is a sense where it's like, okay, you're given the excuse to live. But the flip side here is that Koichi is not told not to feel guilty, right?
Right.
He needs to acknowledge this feeling. He needs to acknowledge what he did in order to overcome it, right?
Yep.
Like he needs to acknowledge like, wow, I let a lot of people down, but there were a lot of extenuating circumstances here. What I was being asked to do was not reasonable. And with
Yep.
that said, I think there is a difference between being willing to die and killing yourself,
Yes.
right? In reality, the real thing, like, Koichi should not, being a kamikaze pilot, I think refusing to kamikaze yourself is okay. In reality, Koichi probably, there were things that he could have done, besides just go into the Japanese meat grinder, right?
Right.
There were things he should have done. However, the thing that he chose to do was lie because he was afraid. And he knew this. So the character arc is not an easy one. It's not a simple one. It's not as simple as going, well, it doesn't matter what you did, right?
Right.
It's okay. Like you were saying. Like, that would not be satisfying to just say
No.
what you did didn't matter. What you did was right. You should not be ashamed of yourself, right?
Right.
No, that's not easy. That's too much of an excuse. Like, sure, even if it's not reasonable to expect kamikaze pilots to kill themselves, the fact of the matter is that Koichi knows why he did it. He didn't do it because he was afraid, right?
Right.
He didn't do it, and he let people down. He did let people down. So Koichi's character arc instead is coming to that sort of harmony, right? Of being, I am willing to die, but I am not willing to kill myself, right? Like, I
Yes.
am, or not even like, I am willing to die, but I am not willing to throw my life away, right? My life in and of itself has value.
Right.
And it has a value that I am not willing to just sacrifice out of a misplaced sense of honor. But that is not the same as saying that I am not willing to die if it means protecting the people I love. Right? And that was
Right.
the realization that Koichi had to come to. This is not a simple character arc, right?
Right.
It's not rote. It's not something that you can like go like, oh, Koichi didn't really do anything wrong, right?
Right.
Like, no, he did. He did something wrong. So
Right.
you get somebody you get to get on the side of Koichi. What you need to do is have a really good actor and really good writing that shows us the internal conflict that he's going through as he struggles to figure out, like, how am I supposed to feel about the fact that all of these people are dead, or maybe because of me, but also I was being asked to do something that was inhuman, right? Like,
Right.
to throw myself into enemy warships is an inhuman thing to ask people. But at the same time, these people are dead because I would not step up, right?
Yep.
So, and then you have an actor who's able to portray that sort of inner pain and conflict, and then gets you on his side as he tries to work through it. And that's something that Hollywood couldn't do. Like you said, I couldn't even, imagine. Hollywood could not do it. If they had a character like that, then the answer would be he would need to come to some sort of simple solution. He would need to be like, well, I guess, I was not wrong for not doing my duty, right? Like, I didn't do anything wrong.
Yep.
Yeah, that would be the way that they would do it. And to be frank, I even think that's going a little far. I don't think Hollywood would ever attempt a character like that. Uh,
Yeah.
I don't think that they would try. I think in the modern day, maybe back when like Spielberg was in his prime portraying like, characters like Oscar Schindler, maybe they could have done something like this. Nowadays there's no one. No
No.
one could do it. Scorsese is still making movies, but he is making movies about horrible people. You know,
Yeah.
like, he makes movies about horrible people, and they're well made, well crafted movies, but they are not necessary. I don't think I would say they were about morally complex characters. They're just about despicable characters.
Yeah.
Uh, in terms of creating a story with such a complex conflict and such an internal conflict, Hollywood is not capable of it. They don't understand morality properly, right? Like, they can't portray this sort of conflict. If you want to portray like that whole thing where Black Widow needs to rescue Red Guardian from prison, there are interesting ways you could do it. Like Black Widow, for example, maybe Red Guardian wants to kill the guards, and Black Widow needs to step in and go like, "We need him. I'm not happy about this," right? And she insists that guards are not killed, right? Like, if we're doing this, nobody is getting hurt, right?
Yes. And
Even if you want to, go ahead, finish.
yeah, no, 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 go for it. You finish your thing and I'll say my thing.
Yeah, even if you want to do it like, oh, they want to have an avalanche cover the prison, even if you want to do something like that.
Yeah.
Like you would need to have Black Widow react with horror,
Yep.
right? And to be frank, I would not even include that. Like, to be honest with you, I just wouldn't do it. But if you're going
Yep.
to do it, Black Widow needs to react with horror. And she needs to react. Like, they have, like, the Red Guardian cheering, and Natasha and, her Yelena, who's, like, the other one in the movie, are
The
flying
other one.
away, and they're
Right.
not. Yeah. And they're just flying away, and they don't react at all while the Red Guardian cheers. Natasha needs to react with horror at something like this. And Natasha needs to go like, okay, we'll rescue you, but we do it my way, no killing. In fact, they actually do something like this in Daredevil. Daredevil and the Punisher work together at one point to take out in like the first 2 or 4 episodes. I think the first 4 episodes of Daredevil are basically like a little mini arc on their own that is completely disconnected from the rest of the season, where the Daredevil goes up against the Punisher, and then it ends with them teaming up. And it's actually like a really good mini arc, and then the rest of the season is garbage. Uh, Daredevil season 2 is not great, except for those 4 episodes, which are pretty good. Uh, but anyway, like they have a moment in there where Daredevil and the Punisher are fighting each other, and Daredevil is famous as a no-kill hero, and the Punisher is famous as a kill hero.
Yep.
But because they team up with each other, Daredevil prevents the Punisher from shooting someone and says no killing, and the Punisher mutters choir boy, right? This is the sort of moment that you would have needed uh,
Mm.
in the Black Widow movie. Like Red Guardian could be like, why don't you just kill them? Come on, I know you could do it. Didn't I train you well? Because they work together or whatever. And then Black Widow goes like, things are different now. We don't kill people anymore. If you kill anyone, then the deal is off, right? Like that's what she would have to do. That would need to be and that needs to be honestly a necessity for the character. If you want to make the character like consistent, she can't kill innocent people. Like this,
Yeah.
I can't even believe that you have to say that out loud, but you do,
Yeah.
apparently. Right? Like Black Widow, the hero who is a part of the Avengers, one of the good guys, cannot be okay with murdering innocent people.
Right.
She needs to be explicitly against this.
Like,
And apparently, you need to say this out loud because it's not obvious to the filmmakers anymore.
right. There's a, like, if, let's say that, let's turn it around a bit. Let's say that it's a KGB prison, right? It is explicitly a sort of mob prison where they're trying to get the secret of the Russian beast super formula or whatever. Like evil sort of genetic monstrosities or whatever, where all the guards are organized crime. Everyone in there kind of deserves to be tormented forever, and then they're all buried by an avalanche forever. That's kind of okay. These aren't innocent guards who are holding real super criminals, who are, even if they're, Russian soldiery, just saying, well, any good Russian soldier is dead. That isn't a morality anyone can really follow, because when will Oceania be at war with East Asia when they're not at war with what was the other one? Uh,
I don't know.
I can't remember. It's all 1984. Hold on. Let me get this right. Let me get this right.
I don't think it really. I don't think it.
But it's like, what will it look like when uh the enemies change or whatever? Will it change? Will it matter? And all this other stuff. Like it just doesn't. It's schizophrenic. Uh, and they submit themselves to their own morals, their own passions, and not to the passions of good storytelling, listening to the muse. In the end, good storytelling doesn't come from doing whatever you want. It comes from listening carefully to what is actually good writing. And these people have a dead conscience and dead soul, more than likely. They serve the dark powers and all this other things like that. They're enemies of good writing, and so much more. And if you doubt me, rewatch She-Hulk Attorney at Law. And when you get to the twerking scene, you'll see me as right. As you see me foam at the mouth at a pulpit. with a picture of
Ooh,
She-Hulk twerking. You know,
yes,
you doubt total depravity? Behold! You know, and it's She-Hulk.
yes. Uh,
uh,
you get the
anyway,
point though. Like
yes.
there's something seriously sick about the way that modern Marvel and modern Hollywood are doing things, and I don't
Yep.
really get it. I don't know what happened. The best that I could think of is that slowly the social justice takeover of Hollywood writing studios has gotten has become basically complete, and this is now where we're at. Uh,
Yep.
but Black Widow is just the example I go back to because, like you said, even to be honest with you, even if everything you said was true and you explicitly portrayed as like a KGB prison where the guards were corrupt and everybody deserved to be there,
Yep.
even then, Black Widow specifically as a character, I don't think should be okay with killing them because remember, she was a former assassin who is trying to go away from that life,
Yep.
who makes a big deal out of having like a lot of red in her ledger that she's trying to eliminate. Like murdering a prison in an avalanche adds a lot of red to the ledger. Like
Yep.
again, I think honestly that the proper way to do it would have been to do like they do in the Daredevil show. Which is have when Daredevil and the Punisher work together and they have two different moral systems. Daredevil insists that the Punisher can't kill people if they're going to work together. Natasha should have went up to Red Guardian and said, "Okay, I'll break you out of jail against my better judgment, even though I think that you're a terrible person, right? Because we need you for whatever we're doing." I
Yep.
mean, the plot of the movie was Swiss cheese and made no sense. But let's assume for the plot's sake, right?
Right.
Uh,
Right.
we need you for what we're doing. So against my better judgment, I will break you out, but only on the condition that nobody is killed. And you could have Red Guardian object and go, you're making this way harder on yourself. Like, if you just killed a few people, like, we could be in and out in no time. And then Natasha could go, that's my condition. If anybody dies, I'm leaving you here and I don't care about the consequences. Right? Like, that should have been what happened. And you could even have Red Guardian object that, like, but these are not good people. The guards
Hmm.
are corrupt, the prisoners. And she could be like, look, I got red on my ledger. I'm trying to wipe it out. And you don't wipe out red on your ledger by murdering a prison. Right?
Right.
Like,
It
that
yeah,
it's just so weird that they don't get something as fundamentally basic as this. And then this is to say nothing of the Scarlet Witch and the absolutely bizarre ending of WandaVision, where Wanda enslaves an entire town in one of the creepiest scenes that I have honestly ever seen, probably. They are begging her to kill them because they're being so tortured by her mind control. And this in itself is actually kind of fine because it's sort of implied that Wanda didn't really know, was kind of going insane, didn't really know the full effects. What's weird is that they excuse her for this. Like they go up to her and they go, "No, no, they'll never know what you sacrificed for them." Uh, And once again, I think of like Mahler and the Critical Drinker. It's like what you sacrificed. It's like you're the one who kidnapped them. It's like you gave up your kidnapped victims, so they'll never know what you sacrificed. It's
total
like
depravity, Anthony.
yes,
All right.
it's bizarre.
It
Go ahead.
is. And we've moved along, and we're at the 2 hour mark. Uh, we've
Woohoo!
made
We did
plenty.
it.
I think we've laid out a pretty good argument and set of arguments, as wide ranging as we may seem, about the quality of the work, how it gets away from the author, and for authors who are, shall we say, not as good, quote unquote, as Alan Moore and others. How they can't even pretend to have a morality or even to make characters like Rorschach. They instead just simply ruin all kinds of better characters for their own egos and satisfactions. And we're not out of the woods yet, though we, uh, pray every day, perhaps. Not really, for Disney's downfall. Um, we're still waiting for it. Be sure to check out our Steamboat Willie inspired Pinkerton's Ghost episode. It's the latest one. A lot of fun. We have some episodes coming up. We just need to wait for the voice acting to come in. Pretty soon, we'll be doing the season finale for Mother Morrow, and we'll be getting back on track for regularly scheduled episodes from myself, Anthony, and Ken. Look forward to them.
Woohoo!
I think season 3 will be our best season yet. Also, next week, Lord willing, we are planning to do a Last Stand stream. You will have to tune in next week to see what Last Stands we choose, uh, as well as the sort of ideas that we can pull from them. Anthony, this is your child. Why don't you tell us a bit about it as an advertisement?
Yes. So I've wanted to do a Last Stand stream for a while because I have been fascinated by a particular Last Stand that has not gotten enough love in the general discussion on the topic. People will talk about the Battle of the Siege of Vienna. People will talk about the fall of Constantinople, which Ben will be discussing with us
Yeah.
later. They will talk about the fall of Tenochtitlan, which was a last stand, even though they lost. Uh,
Yep. Yep.
but people will talk about the fall of Tenochtitlan. They will, of course, talk about the most famous of all the last stands, the Battle of Thermopylae. They'll talk about the last stand of the Swiss Guard when the Holy Roman Empire attacked the Pope at the Papal Palace, and the Swiss Guard, the 189 men of the Swiss Guard, blocked the entrance and gave the Pope enough time to escape through a secret tunnel under the Papal Palace. That's a cool one. But there is another last stand that nobody has ever heard of, or at least not enough people. I'm sure some of you will have. And that is the Siege of Civet Gar. And the Siege of Civet Gar is, quite honestly, one of the single most dramatic historical stories I have ever read. It has everything. Just to give you a taste of what I will be talking about, in this battle, Suleiman the Magnificent, the most famous Ottoman Sultan at the height of the Ottoman Empire's power, took part directly in the battle. He was at the battle, and at stake in this battle was the fall of Christian Europe. It was literally Suleiman the Magnificent leading an army of Ottoman soldiers against 2,000 Christians defending a castle in a tiny border town with the fate of Europe at stake. It is going to be a very, very interesting topic of conversation. It drives me nuts that this is not more famous outside of Croatia, where it is a national, epic.
Mm.
And Ben will be discussing the fall of Constantinople,
Rome.
which
Rome.
that's
Why did
cool
it
too.
fall? Rome.
And yeah, that's cool too, I guess.
It didn't.
Uh,
It didn't fall. It's just you think about it, and then you go like Byzantium, Rome. Oh, I still haven't recovered. 500 years without Rome.
you learn about Rome in class. We all remember the day where we raised our hand and go, "So, can you go to the Roman Empire today?" And then they go, "Oh no, Rome fell." And then you go, "But what do you mean fell?" And then they explain, and then you need to go to the bathroom and cry it out a bit.
Yeah,
No,
vomit.
just me. Yes, just me now. Have a good night, everyone.
Have a good night, guys.
Wait, teacher, what do you mean?